Okay, think about it. From your smartwatch to your baby monitor, our lives are just full of connected devices. But have you ever stopped to wonder how secure they really are? Well, the European Union has, and they've just rolled out a massive new set of rules to tackle that very question. So, in this explainer, we're going to break down their big solution, the Cyber Resilience Act.
So here's what we've got on tap. First, we'll look at the problem we're all facing, this kind of insecure digital world. Then, we'll dive into the solution, the Cyber Resilience Act itself. After that, we'll get into the nitty-gritty, the new rules for tech companies, who's in and who's out, how it's all going to be enforced, and finally, we'll zoom out and ask, what does this mean for the rest of the world?
All right, so first things first, why was this law even necessary in the first place? To really get it, we need to understand the sheer scale of the problem the EU is trying to fix here.
I mean, just take a second and think about it. How many things connected to the internet are in your home or office right now? Your watch, your TV, maybe even your fridge, your car? It adds up fast, right? The number of these so-called IoT devices is set to more than double to nearly 35 billion by 2028. And here's the kicker. Every single one of those is a potential doorway for a cyber attack.
And the financial stakes here are, well, they're absolutely staggering. By 2021, the global cost of cybercrime was estimated at 5.5 trillion euros. I mean, that's a number so huge it's almost hard to wrap your head around. And it's affecting everyone, businesses, governments, and just regular people like you and me.
And it's not just about the money. It's the relentless frequency of these attacks. A 2020 report found that a ransomware attack was hitting some organizations somewhere in the world every 11 seconds. Think about that. It's a constant, non-stop barrage, and way too often, our connected products are the weakest link in the chain. And look, this isn't happening by accident. These vulnerabilities are really the result of some deep, systemic issues. For starters, way too many products are sold with pretty glaring security flaws and just inadequate protections built in. Then, on top of that, you often don't get timely security updates. And a huge one now is that attacks on the software supply chain itself, well, that's become a top emerging threat.
So, faced with this escalating crisis, the European Union decided, okay, a new approach is needed. And that approach is the Cyber Resilience Act.
So what is the CRA, really? You can think of it as the EU's answer to this whole mess. It's a sweeping new law that, for the very first time, creates mandatory, across-the-board cybersecurity standards for pretty much any product with a digital component sold in the EU. The goal is simple, really. Make the digital stuff we all rely on safer for everyone.
Now, this didn't just appear out of nowhere. The CRA went through the whole legislative process, you know? It was first proposed back in September 2022, went through a ton of debates and changes, and was finally adopted and officially became law in October 2024.
Okay, now we get to the real core of it. What does this new digital rulebook actually demand? Well, the most fundamental change is a big shift in responsibility.
The main idea, the guiding principle here, is something called security by design and by default. See, for way too long, the burden of security has been on us, the users. Set a strong password, don't forget to install updates. The CRA basically says, nope, not anymore. It completely rebalances that responsibility, putting the duty of care squarely on the manufacturers for the entire life cycle of their products.
And this all translates into some very concrete obligations. Manufacturers now have to design products based on risk, ship them with secure settings right out of the box, provide timely security updates, minimize the data they collect, and, this is a big one, have a clear process for reporting and fixing vulnerabilities. It's a complete rethink of how digital products have to be built and maintained.
So, here's the million-dollar question for anyone making or selling tech. Does this apply to me? Let's break down exactly who's covered by the CRA and who isn't.
Okay, so the law's reach is incredibly broad. We're talking almost all hardware and software that has a data connection. So think laptops, routers, all your smart home gadgets, even industrial systems. But they did carve out some really important exceptions. For instance, products that are already covered by other specific EU laws, like medical devices and cars, they're out. Pure software as a service is also excluded, and crucially, so is non-commercial open source software.
Now, that last point about open source, that was a huge deal. The first draft of this law caused a massive outcry. A lot of people in the open source world were afraid it would have a chilling effect on the whole collaborative, volunteer-driven ecosystem. They were worried that individual developers could suddenly be held liable for code they were just sharing for free. But after a ton of intense debate,
The final version of the Act introduced this brand new legal idea, the open source steward. What this does is it acknowledges the role that organizations like, say, the Eclipse or Apache Foundations play in overseeing these big open source projects. And it helps shield those non-commercial individual developers from liability. It was a really critical compromise that brought a lot of the community back on board.
Right. A rulebook is only as good as its enforcement. So let's take a look at how the CRA is going to make sure companies actually follow these new standards.
The law takes a pretty smart risk-based approach. So about 90% of products will fall into this default category, where manufacturers can just self-assess their compliance. But, and this is key, products that are deemed important or critical, we're talking things like routers or entire operating systems, they face much stricter assessments, often requiring an independent third-party audit.
For you and me, the consumers, the most visible sign of all this will be that familiar CE marking. You've seen it on products for years, right? Well, now it's also going to serve as an assurance of trust, a little signal that the product you're buying meets the EU's new baseline for cybersecurity.
And for any companies that think they can just ignore the rules, well, the penalties are severe. The fines can go as high as 15 million euros, or 2.5% of their total worldwide annual turnover for failing to meet the core security requirements. I mean, these are numbers that are going to make sure every single manufacturer selling in Europe takes this very seriously.
Okay, so finally, let's zoom all the way out. This is an EU law, sure, but its impact is going to be felt far beyond the borders of Europe.
We're very likely going to see something that experts call the Brussels effect. Remember what happened with GDPR for data privacy? It pretty much became the de facto global standard. Well, the CRA is expected to do the exact same thing for product security. Why? Because the EU is such a massive market, it's just often easier for big international companies to adopt Europe's high standards for all their products, rather than trying to make different, less secure versions for other places.
So what's the timeline here? The law is officially in force as of December 2024, but it's not like a light switch, it's a phased rollout. The first big deadline is September 2026. That's when the vulnerability reporting rules kick in. Then the full set of rules will apply to all products starting in December 2027. That gives manufacturers a pretty decent window to get their act together.
So the Cyber Resilience Act gives us a very clear answer from the EU's perspective. The responsibility now lies with the manufacturer, but it leaves all of us with a much bigger question to think about. As every single aspect of our lives becomes more and more connected, this whole debate over who is ultimately responsible for our digital safety, well, it's really only just beginning.